Right now, let's talk about, well, what we can talk about, because what you can talk about in the workplace rather depends on where you work. I would suggest, for instance, that if you work at the BBC, you probably shouldn't mention that you're a Brexiteer, because they don't seem to like this. Evidence for this is doing a TV show there once and a cameraman whispering at me, "Oh, well done, keep up the good work, but I don't want anyone else to know I'm a Brexiteer because they wouldn't speak to me again." Well, this is kind of on the scale of what is happening across academia. A new report from the Policy Exchange think tank suggests that in higher education institutes, we are seeing a massive threat to academic freedom. People are having to self-censor or face discrimination if they say they vote a particular way. No, not for the BNP, but simply for the Conservatives, or even having supported Brexit. So what's going on? Let's talk to Toby Young. He's General Secretary of the Free Speech Union and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Toby, I must stress at this point, I am a member of the Free Speech Union, and proudly so. I'm very pleased that you set this up to start protecting some of our freedom. We often talk about diversity in many different areas, whether it's in the media and politics or indeed in academia. But the one thing we are not seeing these days is diversity of opinion in many of these places. What's happening in our universities right now?
Well, I'm afraid they're becoming more and more of an ideological monoculture in which, as you say, every form of diversity is championed apart from the most important one, which is viewpoint diversity. And this new report by Policy Exchange lays bare, I think, the extent of the free speech crisis. And it's really helpful to have, because often when you flag this up to people, they claim that it's just a figment of the paranoid imagination of pale, stale conservatives like me. And there isn't any real problem. It's just that we are taken less seriously and don't have the same voice and audience that we used to have. And that's all that this is about. So it's really useful to have this report showing just how extensive this problem really is. So they for instance, they asked a representative sample, or got YouGov to ask a representative sample of over 800 academics how they voted in the 2017 and 2019 general elections, and shock, 75% voted for Labour, the Liberal Democrats or the Greens, and less than 20% voted for right-leaning parties. And they also asked academics whether they'd be embarrassed to sit next to people with dissenting views. So almost half said that they would feel uncomfortable sitting next to a known Leave supporter.
God forbid.
At lunch. But wait, it gets worse. Only 37% said they'd feel comfortable sitting next to someone who, in relation to transgender rights, advocates a gender-critical feminist view. So if you, for instance, think that trans women shouldn't be able to compete in women's sports, shouldn't go to women's prisons, shouldn't be able to enter women's refuges, go into women's changing rooms, then only about a third of people would feel comfortable sitting next to you in the university canteen, which is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
But again, what is particularly extraordinary, and it doesn't matter to me how any particular academic votes or doesn't vote, or other than the fact that it's the fact that they seem to be so bothered by other people having opinions. And it's very noticeable on social media how prominent people are who in academia and NHS as well. And again, we see this in the BBC as well, but there's a very prominent people giving their views because whether they're Remain or they're sort of seen as sort of Labour, liberal, lefty views, and that being totally acceptable and seen as being completely within the norm and fine. But anyone who expresses any views that aren't within that particular sort of circle being considered to be beyond the pale and unacceptable. It wouldn't occur to me as a Leave voter who I mean, again, I voted for virtually every political party other than the Greens over my lifetime. I've got family members. We have massive big rows about Brexit. We're split almost down the middle on Brexit issue. Voting, people voting Labour, Lib Dem, Tory, Brexit Party, everything in between. But it wouldn't occur to me to be bothered by either a colleague or a friend or a family member having a different political view from me. Why is it that academics, who are supposed to be the people running institutions where young people turn up to have their minds broadened, aren't broad-minded themselves?
Yeah, it is odd. I mean, I think that to be fair to the authors of this report, they don't claim that academia is less tolerant of dissent than other professions. And, they're probably right about a lot of professions. You mentioned earlier the mainstream media, particularly the BBC. There's probably not much tolerance for dissent in the BBC, even though outside the BBC's headquarters they have a statue of George Orwell and the quote, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people things they don't want to hear." But that doesn't seem to apply, that rule, even though it's on the statue outside the building, to people inside the building. It's probably true of the arts too, the arts and culture sector. There was a survey last year by an organisation called Arts Professionals, in which they asked thousands of people in the arts whether they self-censored for fear of damaging their careers if they didn't conform to the kind of prevailing progressive orthodoxies. And something like 80% said that they self-censored. So I don't think it's just academia, but it is a particular problem in academia because, universities are places, as you say, where we are supposed to be challenged, where we're supposed to broaden our minds, consider different arguments, and not just be bombarded with one particular point of view and penalised if we dissent from it.
Well, this is it. I can understand if you want to say that we shouldn't actually have people discussing their political views at work, and there may be circumstances where you could argue that that's not appropriate. I have to say, I don't want teachers discussing their political views with children in the classroom. I've got a darn good idea what most of them are. But if we are going to have only one side self-censoring, then that does speak to there being a big problem. And particularly, though, what is bizarre is it's not people with outlandish, far extreme views who are self-censoring. It's people whose views are, as we can see from the last few general elections and the Brexit votes, the mainstream opinion in this country. And whether it's on something like the issue of Brexit or, say, the trans issue, most of these viewpoints that people feel they have to self-censor are the majority opinion of people in this country.
Yeah, that's right. I think when you tell people about the free speech crisis at British universities, they think that you're talking about people with really extreme, hateful views, not being allowed to talk, being no platformed. And some people think, well, that's fine. Free speech doesn't mean you should be able to spout hate speech. But, it's not actually, as you say, it's not people with extreme views that frequently get no platform. More and more frequently, people like Peter Tatchell, Germaine Greer have been no platformed. Jenny Murray, for instance. Jenny Murray was no platformed at Oxford University. I went and spoke at Hull recently to a politics society, and I asked if there'd ever been any protests, because we were in a building called the Larkin Building, named after Hull's most famous alum, Philip Larkin, the poet. And, he said some pretty outrageous things, particularly by today's standards, particularly in his private correspondence with Kingsley Amis, which has now been published. I said, have any students ever protested about this building being named after this poet who said some racist things in the past, even been accused of anti-Semitism? They said, oh no, not a whisper about that. But when we tried to name the lecture theatre the Jenny Murray Lecture Theatre, the protesters were out in force. So as you say, it isn't extreme views that are being censored on campus. It's actually pretty moderate views. If the presenter of Woman's Hour is accused of hate speech, well, none of us are safe.
No, exactly. I don't think any of us is safe, which is one of the reasons why I remember the Free Speech Union. General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, thank you very much indeed for joining us.